this kind of online lecture for guides. And at the same time, I'm not quite sure if that what I would like to present to you is helpful for you. Maybe you know a lot of this before, because we had not the chance to meet before, most of you. But maybe it might help a little, at least to cover 1.5 hours of your free time due to the situation. I was first asked by Omar to give a lecture about pilgrimage from Germany, past and present. And maybe one day we will talk about this issue, about pilgrimage from Germany, about German places in the Holy Land. There are more than the 6 institutions of the German Association of the Holy Land, which I represented until recently. Very interesting things. But when I thought about my first lecture for you, it came to my mind that maybe another thing which I worked on 2-3 years ago might be also helpful for you. The background is, when I started with guiding groups in the 1990s, I met many of the old generation of guides of that time. And some of them used their guiding for some kind of political propaganda from both sides. And sometimes the effect of this political propaganda of the old Israeli soldiers who told in the Golan about the Golan War and so in 73 and so, sometimes the effect of this storytelling was the contrary of that what they expected. They did not succeed with bringing people on their side. The other way around, sometimes the group started to defend the other side. And the same was on the Palestinian side. Some of the guides used the chance to present an extreme pro-Palestinian perspective, and the effect was the contrary, what they wanted to reach. The group started to defend the Israeli position. Of course, one solution for that problem could be to avoid political comments completely. On the other hand, and of course, many of you try to avoid it as much as you can because it sometimes becomes problematic. On the other hand, the people are interested in the political situation. And the question, to whom belongs this country, this Holy Land, is important. So I started sometimes to choose a somehow indirect way of talking about this issue by highlighting the deep connection between the biblical world, which most of our groups are interested in, and the Palestinian culture. For example, when I did a hike in the Batir area, or during a lunch or an evening with a special lecture, this was possible thanks to some discoveries, some things I found when I was traveling through the country again and again. And so I would like to talk today about biblical and Palestinian culture along a walk from Batir to Beit Jala. Of course, you know all this pathway, this wonderful hike experience, which more and more people like to have during a trip to the Holy Land. They are bored of visiting only churches, holy places. They want to walk more and more. And this is one of the wonderful places where you can do it. And Joseph already mentioned that you used the time the last weeks to do some hikes in different areas of the country. And of course, many of these things you can also present in other areas of the country. Start with some preliminary remarks. In our modern day reading of the Bible, the connection between the culture of its origins and today's world seems to have gotten lost. This often leads to misunderstandings. A simple case in point are the many visitors from the West, for example, who are surprised when they are not able to find the wooden stable that they are used to seeing in the traditional images of the birth of Christ. I want to show the next picture. Let me see. Now it works. They are surprised when they cannot find the stable which they are used to from traditional pictures of the Nativity. They are not aware of the fact that in the area surrounding Bethlehem, caves were and continue to be used as stables. The contextual reading of the Bible can help to avoid these misunderstandings and illustrate the close connection not only between the Bible and its historical context, but also between the Bible and the culture of the Holy Land today. Biblical study tours to the Holy Land in particular can be helpful for visitors to better understand these connections, and that the Palestinians, due to the fact that the culture and the people of the region have remained more or less stable throughout history, are also heirs of the biblical culture and of the land of the Bible. Tourism can contribute to the consciousness of his relationship and can, in an indirect way, strengthen the Palestinian identity. A walk through the countryside from Batir to Beit Jana, for example, offers the perfect opportunity for tourists to gain a better understanding of this relationship and taking a closer look at specific details along the hike. For you as local guides, I will explain this with some points. Here in this picture, we see the remains of the so-called Betar fortress. These remains of the fortress overlooking the village of Batir are also known as Khirbet al-Yahud, ruins of the Jews, as the fortress has been used and destroyed during the Second Jewish War against the Romans in 135 AD. It was there, in Batir, Betar, or Bet Ter, where the Jewish leader Bar Kokhba was killed by the Romans and his army defeated. As a result, some call Betar the Masada of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And some Palestinians would prefer to disregard or ignore this part of Batir's history because they feel it is the history of the others. And as a result of all the negative aspects connected with the phrase Bitar, including football, where some fans of Bitar Jerusalem attract attention through their racist slogans. Let us all see what now the fact that a sheikh from the Emirates bought 50% of Bitar Jerusalem, what will this mean for this football club? But this is another question. A contextual study of these ruins of Betar fortress reveals that the fortress is not or must not be part of the history of the others, but it bears witness of a kind of an early intifada. The people of the country at that time tried to get rid of the occupiers from abroad. Even today, remains of the wall built by Roman soldiers encircling the fortress and cutting off the connection to the surrounding land can be found in the area. But the fighters of the Bar Kokhba revolt are the ancestors of both the Palestinians and the Jews, as many of the fighters' families remained in the country following the end of the revolt. They may have changed their religion, but not their cultural behavior. Because culture, in my perspective, precedes religion, And we only have to change our perspective to get another point of view and to look on these remains. We have to view history not from the viewpoint of religion, but of social and cultural background. In this case, to see the revolt not as a conflict between Jews and Romans, Jews and pagans, but of the oppressed and the empire. And so the fight for the land is also a fight for the history. And so you can also connect to this part of your history when you take this point of view, looking to the Betar fortress. This was point 1. Let's continue with point 2, water. You all, or I was very impressed when I came the first time to Batir to see this abundant water streams, especially in springtime. You have here the famous spring of Batir, which fills this magnificent pool. And then the water from this pool is led through the channel to the fields of the local people. And I was very impressed by this sophisticated system, how to share the water so that everybody gets enough for his own fields. But what I want to point out is the following. In the center of Batir, you will find a spring representing the importance of water for life. And this is reflected in so many verses of the Bible. The contrast between the desert and the land with an abundance of water is to be found, for example, in Isaiah chapter 35. I quote, "For waters break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool and the thirsty ground springs of water." And in Isaiah 1:30, it is expressed what happens if there's a lack of water. And in this case, a lack of faith. "For you," I quote again, "for you shall be like an oak whose leaf withers and like a garden without water." And so we see even more that water can become an image for spiritual truth, as in Isaiah 44:3. I quote, "For I will pour water on the thirsty land and streams on the dry ground. I will pour my spirit upon your offspring and my blessing on your descendants." The importance of water is the reason for so many associations and customs regarding the water of life in Palestinian belief and in Palestinian superstition. Thanks to the articles of Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan, the first nativist ethnographer in Palestine, in the Journal of the Palestinian Oriental Society, we have become aware of this. And I only can recommend to read these old articles of Tawfiq Kanaan because these are so full of insights regarding the connection between the old Palestinian culture and the biblical world. Here again, some of the terraces of Batir, you all know them. Early springtime. And every tourist who comes there will love it. One last picture here, and in the foreground you have the old tomb of a sheikh. And this is point number 3, sheikhs, prophets, and tombs. The Bible sometimes refers to elders as being important when legal disputes occur. This also reminds us of the importance of elders and sheikhs in the Palestinian culture. They were not only important in dealing with the water resources of Batir, I just mentioned it, but were also important during times when governmental institutions were no longer functioning. For example, during the Second Intifada. And as I understood, even nowadays in some regions of the Zone B, they are still, the important institutes, they replaced the official authorities because there is none. And in Batir, one has the opportunity to experience also what a modern day sheikh was like. Hassan Mustafa, the leader of the village in the 1950s, is not only an example of creative resistance, but also of a leader who led his community toward a new future, establishing community institutions and facilities that were supported by the residents, even on a voluntary basis. We know again from the works of Tawfiq Kanaan that many of those elders and sheikhs were venerated after their death, becoming kind of village saints. Shrines, wali or awliya, and sanctuaries, maqamat, were erected in their honor. And also this refers to a custom mentioned already in the Bible. In the New Testament, in the Gospel, we read that Jesus said, according to the Gospel of St. Matthew, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the tombs of the righteous and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we wouldn't have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets." This clearly shows that the veneration of tombs and maqamat of prophets were already common during the time of the Bible. Also, this was proven in a decisive study by the professor of New Testament, Joachim Jeremias, which is still worth to be read. And as in the time of the Bible, today we have to prevent using or venerating those tombs of religious or political leaders in an inadequate manner. Speaking again about tombs, along the way from Batir to Beit Jalla in the Wadi Mahur, you may also find the rock tombs of ordinary people, not only of sheikhs, some with wheel stones to close the tomb entrance. They lie amidst the landscape, sometimes forming a kind of a garden. Here, tourists, pilgrims, guests may have the chance to better understand the differences between a modern type tomb and the tombs of the past. But they not only may see a similar tomb as described in the Gospel, but also have a greater understanding of why Mary Magdalene supposed the risen Christ to be the gardener, as it is mentioned in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 20. Let's come to a next point, number 4, agriculture. The terraces, vineyards, and fields found along the way from Batir to Beit Jalla underscore the centuries of agricultural maintenance in the area. The Bible mentions all the fruits still being the most important in Palestine: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. These are the so-called fruits of the land, as they are named in Numbers chapter 13. The most important agricultural products are bread, wine, and oil. This is reflected, for example, in Psalm number 104. I quote, "That he may bring forth food from the earth and wine to gladden the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread to strengthen man's heart." The daily meal of the people is described in 2 Samuel 17. Wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans or lentils, honey and curds, and sheep and cheese from the herd. So again, the biblical world is very, very close to the traditional Palestinian world. Along the way, you will also come across an open area called the Ma'ara, which means, as far as I learned, joy or feast. Excuse my terrible Arabic, you will pronounce it the right way. For you, it's very difficult to pronounce my second name, as Joseph said, and this is why I'm so grateful to my parents that they gave me the first name George, which is understandable all over the world. But back to my text. During the time of harvest, this Ma'ara, this is the place where the fruits are collected, where people eat and drink. The harvest is the most important time of the agricultural year. In some areas during this time, farmers used to live in towers or huts close to their fields. And the origin of the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, is based upon this tradition of living in huts during the time of harvest. It was later that it became a commemoration to the time of the Exodus. It means to the living in tents and huts during the 40 years of wandering through the desert. Once again, in the works of Tawfiq Kanaan, who published a number of brilliant essays in Germany and in German, but also in English and in Arabic, we find that even within the local Christian community of his day, it was still the tradition to bring the first fruits of the year into the church. Here they were blessed by the priest and shared with the faithful, as we find it in the Jewish tradition of going to the temple, bringing the fruits. Only the oil was left in the church and was used to light the lamps in the sanctuary. This is what Kanaan describes. So there is a close connection to the biblical commandment bringing the first fruits into the temple. In the book of Leviticus, we find the Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and tell them, when you have come into the land which I give to you and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest." This is exactly what happened in the Palestinian culture until the early 20th century, as I mentioned. Reading further in the book of Leviticus, you find in the Bible the commandment to leave something for the poor during the harvest. I quote, "And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God." Leviticus chapter 23. This is the background of the meeting between Ruth and Boaz in the fields of Bethlehem. Ruth is collecting the gleanings left by the knights of Boaz. And this practice is still being carried out in the Palestinian culture today, as you might know better than me. But for me, it was so stunning to see the first time in the area of Sebastia, after the olive harvest, coming a poor woman collecting the olives which were left for her by the ones who did the harvest before. And this was for me, as I said, so stunning to understand the very first time that this biblical tradition, which is not Jewish, but which is connected to the country, still survives in the Palestinian society. In the Bible, you also find the commandment to especially protect the trees of food, even in times of war. There is written, Deuteronomy 20, verse 19 to 20, "When you besiege a city for a long time, making war against it in order to take it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. You may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Are the trees in the field human?" That it means fighters, that you should be besieged by you, that they should be only trees, not trees for food. You may destroy and cut. These pictures of this picture, you all understand what I'm speaking about. To me, this seems to be one of the reasons why the Palestinians consider the destruction of olive and other trees by Israeli soldiers or settlers to be so cruel. In their culture, this biblical veneration, the Palestinian culture, this biblical today, tourists are often unaware of this practice of destruction, and that it even contradicts biblical Jewish law. By reading the biblical verse, they can gain a better understanding of this principle. No, please stay one moment with this picture. Traditionally, the most important animals in Palestine are sheep and goats. Normally, you will not see them while hiking through the area of Batir. From the time between spring and the harvest in the fall, the farmers keep them away from the fields so they do not destroy the plants. In the winter and spring, they live close to the desert where they can find food. As a result, in the story of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem is somewhat accurate. The situation described is one of summer. The sheep are close to the city and their fields. In fact, the idea of dating Christmas in December came from abroad. The Emperor Constantine replaced the feast of the sun god, so-called Sol Invictus, by the feast of the birth of the true Son, Jesus Christ. And this is why we celebrate Christmas in December. But maybe if there is some truth in the biblical narrative, maybe Jesus was born during summertime. Close to Batir, you may also find vineyards, like here on the photo, with old watchtowers where the family used to live during harvest. Those vineyards and towers are often mentioned in the Bible. But in addition, texts concerning fields and vineyards, like those regarding water, can have a deeper meaning. As such, the vineyard can become an image for the people. We read in the book of Isaiah, "My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice wines. He built a watchtower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. And he looked for it to yield grapes." But this vineyard now is a parable, is an image for the people of Israel, what God does for it, and so on and so on. Even the parables of Jesus are often taken from the agricultural world. In Matthew 13, for example, he speaks of a sower, about the weeds, and about a treasure hidden in a field. But let's speak a little more explicitly about the land. The close connection of the peasants to their piece of land and to the inheritance of their forefathers is also mentioned already in the Bible. A famous story in the Old Testament where a king, the secular authority of that time, does not respect this relationship may be found in 1 Kings 21. And I will now read a longer quotation because it is so stunning and important. Here we have the picture of the sheep and close to the desert. But here we have the picture of a medieval manuscript illustrating this story, which I now will read. It is written, "Naboth the Jezreelite had a vineyard in Jezreel, beside the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. And after this, Ahab said to Naboth, 'Give me your vineyard, that I may have it for a vegetable garden, because it is near my house, and I will give you a better vineyard for it. Or if it seems good to you, I will give you its value in money.' But Naboth said to Ahab the king, 'The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers.' And Ahab went into his house, vexed and sullen because of what Naboth the Jezreelite had said to him. For he had said, 'I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers.' And he lay down on his bed and turned away his face and would eat no food. But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said to him, 'Why is your spirit so vexed and you eat no food?' He said to her, 'Because I spoke to Naboth the Jezreelite and said to him, give me your vineyard for money, or else if it pleases you, I will give you another vineyard for it.' And he answered, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' And Jezebel, his wife, said to him, Do you now govern Israel? Arise and eat bread and let your heart be cheerful. I will give you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name and sealed them with a seal. And she sent the letters to the elders and the leaders who lived with Naboth in his city. And she wrote in the letters, proclaim a fast and set Naboth at the head of the people and set two worthless men opposite him and let them bring a charge against him, saying, you have cursed God and the king, then take him out and stone him to death. This is what you can see here in the manuscript. And the men of his city, the elders and the leaders who lived in his city, did as Jezebel had sent word to them. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death with stones. Then they sent to Jezebel, saying, Naboth has been stoned, he is dead. As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned and was dead, Jezebel said to Ahab, arise, take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite, which he refused to give you for money, for Naboth is not alive but dead. And as soon as Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, Ahab arose to go down to the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite to take possession of it. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who is in Samaria. Behold, he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone to take possession. And you shall say to him, thus says the Lord, have you killed and also taken possession? And you shall say to him, thus says the Lord, in the place where dogs licked up the blood of Naboth, shall dogs lick your own blood. End of the quotation. For me, the attitude of Naboth towards his land is exactly the one you can find in Palestine today. It is a direct heritage from the forefathers, and this attitude is a direct heritage from biblical times. And every reader of the Bible should understand. Here, the prophet and God is to uncover the injustice and cruelty of the king. They are both on the side of both, the prophet and God are both on the side of the victims, and God is the one to revenge the injustice. Let's come to a last point. Customs and traditions. Along the way, or during a break, a lunch maybe in Hosh Yasmin or wherever, it is also possible to discuss other elements or to present other elements of Palestinian and biblical culture. And of course, maybe you know much better examples than I found in the literature. The Bible is full of references to customs and traditions that continue to exist in modern-day Palestinian culture. It begins with the manner of speaking. The biblical language is florid and full of proverbs and hyperbole. For example, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Palestinian proverbs, and as I said, maybe you know better than me, are especially full of biblical language and biblical atmosphere. Again, thanks to Tawfiq Kanaan, we know of these traditional ways of thinking and speaking. By the way, here, here we have a picture of Kanaan and one of his famous books about proverbs. Many of the old sayings and proverbs, no longer well known, have begun to disappear from the Palestinian memory. I would like to mention a few examples from his collection, Popular Proverbs. In his essay about God in the belief of Palestinian Arabs, he mentions the saying, by the honor of the one who does not slumber nor sleep. And again, excuse my terrible Arabic, the same idea you may find in the Psalms. There is written, Psalm 121, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Or you may look at the Palestinian proverb, do not retaliate as the Lord shall be the one to repay. This reminds us of the biblical verse, never avenge yourselves, but leave room for the wrath of God, for it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. It's not only mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, but also in the letter to the Romans. One last example. One said, "Shall we call a doctor?" He answered, "It is not suitable. I was wounded by my Lord, and he will take care of me." Rabbi Charani or Rabbi Idawini Akhir u Asla. Compare this to the striking resemblance in the book of Job. For he, the Lord, wounds, but he binds up. He strikes, but his hands heal. Along these same lines, you will find many blessings and praises in the Bible. Some perhaps sounding a bit strange to someone coming from Europe. A particularly elaborate form of praise, for example. Blessed is the womb that bore you and the breasts at which you nursed, which we find in Luke chapter 11, or the famous Magnificat. Here you find the Arabic text in Ein Karim. It may be difficult for a European to imagine this being a part of daily behavior. But as I understood, in Palestine, these forms of praise are not only encountered during special feasts like the birth of a child or a wedding, but also in everyday life. For example, the simple "God bless your hands," Islamu Idek, instead of "thank you." Another nativist ethnographer, Stephen H. Stephen, discovered many biblical affinities in Palestinian music. He compares the Song of Songs to contemporary Palestinian popular lore and finds a, I quote, "striking resemblance between the old and the new, both in the expression of ideas and in the grouping of words." His love inspires the male lover to describe his beloved, I quote again, "with a variety of pretty appellatives common to both periods, such as dove, reed, an enclosed garden, a spring shut up, a fountain sailed, a garden fountain, a well of living water," all expressions which you can find in the Song of Songs and still in the popular traditional Palestinian music. One last example which I learned from Father Mitri Raheb and which illustrates the thesis of the consistency of biblical and Palestinian culture. Even a text connected to visitors from the West and liturgically today Jewish has its roots in the culture of the land and can reveal its other face in a contextual reading. I quote from the book of Proverbs, "An excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm, and all days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of the idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. In Jewish homes, this text is read every Friday evening in the liturgy of Erev Shabbat in the so-called Shabbat liturgy, in praise of the Jewish wife. And I was very impressed when I visited a Jewish friend once and witnessed this tradition. And my wife, who joined me from that time on, asked me, well, I expect this now from your side as well at the end of the week, that you praise me for what I did during the week and that you not always realize. But let's come back to our theme. If you stop connect it merely to the Jewish tradition of nowadays, but read this text with such a Palestinian woman, maybe with your own wife or mother in mind or grandmother, then you feel that this kind of woman survives in the strong Palestinian woman of nowadays. You can still find these women sitting at the market in Bethlehem, selling her products after taking care of her family in the early morning. And this may help to establish the fact that the biblical word survives here. This kind of woman, being one of the excellent wives of the Bible, regardless of all the changes in politics and religion during the centuries, and while she cares, her husband is, as it is mentioned in the text, is known in the gates, but he just sits among the elders of the land. Today, one would probably say he sits with his friends in the coffee house smoking nargile. Let's sum up. Tourism, for me, offers the chance to better understand the biblical world. This concept has been understood for many centuries, and it is well known to all those who have traveled to the region, starting with Egeria and Jerome in the 4th century, up to Gustav Dahlmann, who worked with Taufik Kanaan at the beginning of the 20th century and beyond. Based on the words of Dahlmann, by the way, his famous work Arbeit und Sitte in Palästina is now to be translated into Arabic by some people at the Dar al-Nadwa in Bethlehem. Based on these works of Dahlmann, Kanaan, and others, and with the help of well-trained guides, guests can better understand the similarities and affinities between the biblical and the Palestinian cultures. This will not only help to avoid misunderstandings of the biblical text, but will also help to understand why the Palestinians are so deeply rooted in the country and its culture. The study of the Palestinian culture is not only important to understand the Bible, the main focus of Dahlmann and others, but also to strengthen the Palestinian identity and the connection of the Palestinians to their land, and to help guests to understand that not only the Jews, but at least also the Palestinians are the heirs of the biblical land. This concept rejects the idea of Palestinian culture being mostly pre-Israelite and pre-biblical, common to ethnologists of the 1970s and onwards, but attempts to return to the ideas of Canaan and his circle. They were convinced that there is a common Semitic, that there are common Semitic roots for all Palestinians, including those who are of Jewish religion. This culture, as related to Canaan and his works, was already undergoing change during his lifetime, and is threatened even more with its extinction today. As a result, it is all the more important to protect and save that which still remains. For example, the area of Batir, with its numerous elements of this culture. It is not possible to return to the time of Canaan, nor would anybody particularly want it. But it is therefore especially important that Palestinian tour guides, in my perspective, take the initiative to preserve the holy remains of the traditional culture and making them part of the Palestinian narrative. Thanks to those guides, guests may at least be able to ask questions regarding the Palestinian people and their roots. And that they may understand that it is a Christian myth that all Jews left the country after the year 70 or 135, and that it was resettled completely by pagans. No, many people, Jews and others, remained in the country, some of them becoming Christian or Muslim, but all preserving the culture and the way of living of biblical times. In the end, tourists may even finally understand the meaning of a concept which I used to call, with an expression of one of my academic teachers, vertical ecumenism. That means finding elements of all the older religions in the ones that follow. Associated with this concept is one last example, and I come to an end very soon. Psalm 65, a biblical song, which may have at first been sung in honor of Baal, the Canaanite god of fertility. Later, it was sung by the Jews, and even later, and nowadays, it is sung by Christians in honor of the one God. And perhaps even Muslims can praise Allah with its words for the fertility of the land, especially around Batir and Bethlehem, the land of Al-Khadr, another figure which is somehow common to all the religions and which is a good example for vertical ecumenism, but this would be another lecture to be given. The fertility of the land, which is at the same time the land of the Bible and all true Palestinians who respect it and its culture. In this psalm we read, God, you visit the earth and water it. You greatly enrich it. The river of God is full of water. You provide their grain, for so you have prepared it. Your water its furrows abundantly, settling its ridges, softening it with showers, and blessing its growth. You crown the year with your bounty. Your wagon tracks overflow with abundance. The pastures of the wilderness overflow. The hills gird themselves with joy. The meadows clothe themselves with flocks. The valleys deck themselves with grain. They shout and sing together for joy. With this prayer, I want to end. I thank you very much for your interest and your patience.
Thank you very much. Would you, okay, thank you for ending the screen share. We have a number of questions. The tomb or the cemetery that you showed us close to Beit Jala, from which period is it?
This is from, nobody knows exactly, but it might be from the 1st, 2nd century AD, as far as I know.
What is the original actual beginning history from the Canaanite period of Khirbet Batir?
This fortress, which you can see there, is from the Roman period. And it was used by the fighters of the Second Jewish Revolt to defend against the Roman army, which fought their last battle there in Batir. But there were no scientific diggings as far as I understood. So maybe older layers may come, maybe unearthed when somebody is doing it.
Thank you. This sounds more like as a comment, if you'd like to comment on it. I hope, Dr. George, no one among us or others have ever claimed no Jews were left in Palestine after 70 AD. Jews did remain in Palestine, especially in the Galilee, and they actually formed the nucleus of the Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah, that's completely true, but sometimes people have in mind this idea that after the year 70 or 135, all the Jews left the country. They all lived in diaspora, and they only came back in the 19th, 20th century to get back their country. Of course, you know better. but I know that this is the background with many of the tourists that come to the country, and why they have the feeling that after the year 70, the country was given to people who do not own it, who were not originally from the country, and so that those who come back have the right to take back everything.
I would like to make a personal comment. In many of the Palestinian villages until this day, the first fruits are always offered to the church: grapes, figs, and so on. It's also part of the liturgy in the Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
I think there's more people who have raised their hands. There isn't people who are writing in the chat. I think maybe English is not as exciting to write. So I'm going to open the chat. So Majid Nasrallah.
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Röwekamp.
You may say George. It's easier.
George. Yeah, you know me. Yeah, I'll put on my video because I am I used to guide.
Yeah.
Yes, I used to guide in Germany.
Yeah.
I had really a problem with one priest, Catholic priest, when we are talking about the Jewish in the Old Testament. Do they receive salvation? And the Jewish after the coming of Christ, do they receive salvation? On the other hand, there is a dispute in Judaism about life after death in Judaism, where the Sadducees, for example, didn't believe in that, where others, they say when the Messiah comes, he is going to be the final judge regarding, but it is not that they believing in life after death like the Christian faith, etc. So do Jewish receive salvation according to Christian faith, please? This is a very important question.
I will leave this question for George, but I think it is for Dr. George. It might be also good to stick with the topic of the meeting. I mean,
it is part of the topic, dear.
Yeah.
Judaism, he talk.
I will make it very short. Of course, you are right regarding the difference between Pharisees and Sadducees. After the Jewish revolts, only the Pharisee kind of Judaism survived. So nowadays, the idea of eternal life is part of the Jewish faith in all the denominations, the Jewish traditions. And as I think we all agree that the question of salvation is a question only God can answer in the end. But there is a possibility according to Christian faith that of course also Jews who follow their belief have the possibility to receive salvation.
Thank you.
The question is good or bad, and not religion.
This was so we have also George, I think.
Yes, كيفك عمر؟
الحمد لله George.
حبيبي, good evening, sir.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening, George. My name is George. You were talking about the parables used by the, of course, by the Arabs over here or the Palestinians over here concerning the land and agriculture and other things. You were quoting from the Bible. What's very I would like to add a statement over here. What is very let me say weird is that the Bible, the Old Testament, was compiled over here after the Jews came back from Babylon. So literally speaking, you know, we're talking about Aramaic, the Aramaic language, which is a Semitic language. So literally speaking, the source that you quoted from, it goes way earlier than, of course, the Arabic language, which means that the Palestinians over here did quote from the Bible, okay, and not vice versa. Did I get the statement good?
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So literally speaking, do you know when did the Palestinians or the Arabic language did originate in the land over here, more or less? Since you were talking about parables and Palestinians. Thank
the
you.
Arabic language arrived in the 7th century with the Arabs, but of course it is a Semitic language, and they took a lot of words also from the Aramaic. I think you know better than me. You muted your microphone.
Yeah, he's quick in muting. Anyways, don't we know about Nehemiah and of the Old Testament and the book of Ezra about the Arabs who were living in the land over here? Don't we know about the book of Acts, chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit came down on the people, they started talking in Arabic as well? Don't we know about the Nabateans speaking Arabic as well? So it's way before the 7th century. So I think over here, historians should change the click a little bit, go back from the 7th century. Yeah, back to the 4th century before Christ. That was my statement. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Shukran, Omar.
Thank you, George. If you have questions, please raise your hand. I mean, it's you're the best speaker we've had, Dr. George. Everybody understood completely what you have said, and nobody's even having questions.
I just want to add another statement, commenting also on Dr. George and George Stefan, my colleague, that parables actually develop with people living in the area. For example, as George mentioned, some of the parables and that we are using today, quoted either from the Bible or even before the Bible, because the people that lived here for so many years and long time, as you said, Dr. George, that they might change their religion on the way from, for example, paganism to Judaism to Christianity to Islam, etc. But important also to understand that we are still in the Middle East, and almost we can say that all the countries around have almost the same culture background. And most of them were either farmers or so, even Jesus in the New Testament. And we always read it in the Bible, always using parables from the land, from the culture of the people, from the work of the people, fishermen or farmers or shepherds or whatever. But important to understand that the land is the mother of all parables, because we are living here and we are learning from the land, either through our work as farmers or as other things. And we develop slogans, or we develop parables, or we proverbs or whatever through the time till today. And as you mentioned, Dr. Tawfiq Kanaan, which is an important author of the parables of this land. There is others, of course. It's important to connect our life today to our past, either culturally or biblically or faith or so on. And we can see that, as you mentioned, Ruth and Boaz, today still we see the poor people come behind the harvesters when they pick olives and they collect olives, and on purpose people leave behind them some for those who needy, that they come later on to pick and to survive on that. So it's important to connect the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, with our life today and what we do and what we practice. We practice our faith through our life. So that's important for us. Thank you very much for the commentary. And back to you, Dr. George.
Yeah, and for me, my experience is that this convinces sometimes people more that the Palestinians belong to this country, that they are the heirs of the country more than any political statement.
Of course, of course, of course.
I have, I have a comment. Since we have George, who has raised his hand, but we want to try to do it with best, to divide the time as much as possible. So we will give you a chance if we don't get a question. But I have a comment, and it could help opening the discussion. In Palestine, actually, I find it personally, it's not within our culture that we leave the leftovers for the poor. When people do the harvest, it's the first people who eat, usually it is you give it to the neighbors, you give it to the poor people. I don't know if this is something, if any of the guides would have a comment on this, but is this part of our culture or contradicts our culture?
No, it's part of our culture, of course. Of course. As we say here, rarely you will find people that go to bed at night without having a supper, because always neighbors look for their neighbors, the poor ones, the needy ones. They send them food, they send them goods, they send them whatever they need without even asking. And that's a tradition. And so many experience we have by showing that. And personally, I witnessed so many examples of that, where people always think of others. It's part of our culture. It's mercy in all religion.
So if there's nobody else who would like to ask,
Ati George is
Yusuf, I think what Umar was asking about the leftovers. If we give our neighbors any leftovers, it's Umar. It's fresh leftovers, olive trees fresh from the tree, wheat as Ruth and Boaz fresh from the tree. Okay, and not leftovers as we eat, because when we have to share, as Joseph said, so we share parts of the clean plate first to our neighbors, then we eat the leftovers. And usually we do the blessings, of course, after we eat, not like the Americans or in Europe. Okay, maybe Dr. George knows, in Germany, they do the blessing at the beginning. Okay, what I wanted to say as well before you had your question is about as well another statement about the Jewish people. We believe that the Jews who lived in Palestine up till 1948 were, of course, Palestinian Jews. And when the Lord gave lots of the parables, of course, in Palestine, he was quoting Greek language. We know that he spoke Greek, okay, Aramaic, because we have evidence from scriptures that he spoke Aramaic as well, okay, and Latin as well. So that was, I wanted the statement over here to be clear about languages, because sometimes the parables would mislead us, Dr. George, because nowadays we have lots of scholars since the 19th century up till the 20th century who would take parts of the parables and then do the interpretation as they wish, which makes us fall into problems, especially the new. Of course, I think you agree with me. Like, for instance, a rich man going into heaven, it's easier for a camel to go through eye of the needle. Okay, sometimes camel is gamal, which is not camel as we know. Okay, it's like the anchor and then the big rope with a knot going into it. So that makes our problem nowadays, with all respect, with Christendom, is that look at the States. We have more than 6,000 denominations. Everyone, 2 or 3 people gathered together, they have a church. So that's a big problem. Yeah, I guess so.
Thank you, George. We have Isa Ghattas.
Good evening, everybody. I have the last question, maybe from the first question. I didn't receive the exact answer. I was asking about Khirbet Etam. We have the special cemetery, and it was very big discussion about it from a time. And that's why I would like to know not only the period of this cemetery, but you said about it from the 1st century, yeah? Dr. George?
You are speaking about the tombs or the Betar fortress?
No, the tombs, the cemetery, the tombs.
The tombs.
Yeah.
I have no idea from which exact time they are. I understood they are
But what
from
kind of
the.
what kind of tombs that we have? It's not Kohim.
Oh, I'm not an expert of that, so I don't want to give an answer which misleads you. I only understood that they are rock-cut graves from the first century, but I don't know more. This is what I heard from those people who guided me there.
Thank you. Sami?
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, so we're talking about parables, Jesus teaching, giving examples from the real life as you explained, you know, agriculture, so on, so on, so on. But in reality, the parables of Jesus were clear, but not exactly clear. Meaning Jesus did not really spell it out, clear out on the open. There was some secret, some understood what he was talking about, some did not. So obviously the parables of Jesus meant it to be not understood to some, but understood to others. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, I think there are two levels. The first level is what he describes as part of the daily life of the agriculture. And the second level is the spiritual meaning. And I think everybody understood what he described as part of their daily life, but not everybody could do the next step to the next level to understand the deeper, the inner, the spiritual meaning of what was this image for. This makes the division between the people. I think everybody knew what he described, but not everybody understood, did not do the transfer to the other level or to the deeper meaning. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, and yes, of course. And maybe this is why Jesus said, you know, those who have ears let them hear, and
yes.
you know, this is what Jesus meant, that their heart is you know, closed hearts, closed minds. This is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, you can see and hear what is going on the ground, but that does not mean that you hear and see and understand the deeper meaning of what you see. So there are also two kinds of eyes. There are the eyes where you can see what is obvious on the ground. You can see the man who puts the grain on the ground, but not everybody understands that this is an image for the word of God, which is spread out, and some understand, some take it, and within some of the people it brings fruit, and with others it does not. So everybody can understand the simple meaning or the simple thing, what is going on, which he starts from Jesus, but not everybody can understand the deeper meaning. And this means he might have ears and eyes, physical ears and eyes, but he does not have the eyes and the ears to understand and to see what is behind, what is meant by this.
Thank you. Thank you. Khadra has also mentioned in the chat, yes, it is part of our culture. My grandmother always told me that they would leave olives on the trees for the poor. Yeah. I mean, my grandmother was telling me leave stuff on the tree for the birds, not for the...
Yeah, but this shows that some of the traditions get lost step by step, and this is why it's so important to ask the elderly what was the original meaning of what, and of some strange traditions or customs you may even notice in your family, to preserve it. And yeah, because maybe you are the last ones who are able to ask those questions. Maybe the next generation is not even able to ask these questions because they don't see it.
True, this is very true. There is a question in the chat. I can send it to you again. It's in German. I'll put it just now for you. So it's the last one.
I see one thing from Anna. This is just a comment, it's not a question from Anna Salame.
Yes. It's so I just copied
it.
them.
I read. It was just a comment. It was a greeting and some comment. It was not a question.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to
do
extend it longer than necessary.
Okay. So I think it's we would like to thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, on behalf of Sabil and Youssef.
Yes, thank you, Omar. Really, it was an interesting lecture today. Thank you very much for your effort, Dr. George, for this great lecture and good information. And we appreciate you, and we would like very much in the future to have another meeting on another subject, if it's possible. On behalf of all the guides that were today with us, I would like to thank you very much for the great lecture and the time that you spent with us. Thank you very much.
With pleasure. And as I said in the beginning, if you are interested in the other topic, which was on the table in the very beginning, pilgrimage from Germany to the Holy Land, past and present, and German places in the Holy Land, of course, we can have another lecture in the next month. And because unfortunately, I agree that tourists will not come back so soon. So we will have another few Thursdays to be together without guests.
Of course, of course. Thank you very
Inshallah,
much.
there is one more question that just came in. There is one more question that came in. Do we see Jesus' parables in the Old Testament?
Of course, he learned so much from the so-called Old Testament, which was his Bible. And this would be also another topic to see in how many cases the New Testament, Jesus himself, and the way the evangelists spoke about Jesus is connected to the Old Testament, and in how many cases they took parts of the so-called Old Testament and did a kind of re-lecture with the background of the new experience with Jesus. So of course there is no direct parable which took Jesus from the Old Testament, but he's also speaking about vineyards, and of course he knew the parables about the vineyard of the Old Testament, and he developed it further and gave them kind of new, not complete new meaning, but put it into another frame so that it fitted to the situation of his time, because the Old Testament was his Bible, and he lived from that, and he took so many images, pictures, words from there and adapted it to his life, to his people, to his apostles and the crowds to whom he spoke. So we don't find them directly, but of course, a lot of motives he took from the Bible of his days and developed it and made it fitting with his own situation and with his own preaching and with his own message.
Thank you very much. So it is, I wish you a very relaxing evening, everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you once again. All the best for you. And if we don't see each other before Christmas, so I wish you all Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. May it be better than 2020.
Thank you very much. Thank you.